Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about how to use commas correctly. Comma errors are surprisingly very common. So if you watch this slide and understand some of the basic principles behind why we use commas and how we use commas, you will feel much more confident in your writing. So I don't know if you're anything like me. I have a great deal of difficulty dealing with 1,000 rules. I cannot remember these detailed rules. I cannot follow them because I can't remember them. But I can follow about 3 rules, 5, 6, 7 principles. If I understand why I do certain things, I am likely to follow those rules. So it's much the same way. I am going to present about 7 rules. They're not necessarily rules, but principles behind why we use commas. You will be able to use commas with more facility. So the principle number 1 is when you have introductory phrases. But before we get to that, let me ask you this question. What's a sentence? Okay, some of you might answer that the sentence is a complete thought. But that definition has never worked for me. It's so vague and abstract. My more practical definition of a sentence is that it's a statement about who did what or what happened. Isn't that better? So let's say you have a sentence like Tom drinks Coke, used to be capitalized, every day. Okay, let's say you have a reader whose attention span is as short as that of a fruit fly. When that reader is faced with a sentence like this, what does the reader expect the first word to be? Because the definition of a sentence is that it's a statement about who did what or who does what. So the reader will expect the very first word to be the subject, right? But if this is not the first word, then all is not well. Let's say if you added something like in fact, maybe in continuation to some other statement, you said in fact Tom drinks Coke every day. Okay, the reader's looking at this sentence and goes, oh, is in the subject? No. Is fact the subject? No. And the reader gets confused because this reader doesn't have a lot of patience. Like, oh, okay, what is it? What's the subject? I'm going to give up on this sentence. Okay? So the function of this comma in this case is, look, don't panic. It's right here. It's right here. It's right here. The subject, real subject, follows. So to signal to the reader that the main subject, the main verb, in this case here, will come later, so don't panic. Is that easy enough to understand? And then when I say the size doesn't matter, what I'm saying is this introductory phrase can be 1 word or 2 words like this, 3 words, or it can be as long as almost a sentence. So a small introductory phrases would be something like generally, moreover. Notice that this is the subject. Oops, let me go back and let me get a pen. Cannot believe you have to do it for every page. This is the subject, this is the subject. So what does the comma do? It functions as a signaling device. Like, don't panic, the subject follows. Same thing here. The amount of chocolate is the subject, right? Some people is the subject. So there's actually 2 introductory phrases, but they're separate. So comma, comma, to indicate that the real subject follows, do not panic. Or it can be even larger, and they're usually signaled because there are subordinating conjunctions. Oops, I did the same thing again. Conjunctions, they start the clause, although, if, as, in order to, or when, because, even though, granted, as, etc. These conjunctions start the clause that are subordinate to the main clause, which is the main sentence. And these things, when they come at the beginning of a sentence, if you can go for 3 days without eating chocolate, then you know that you have willpower to overcome any obstacles. Because the real subject is here, and this is just a condition for the following sentence to be true, right? And if you were to determine between the two clauses, a clause is a combination of subject and a verb. Sometimes a clause can be a complete sentence, or it can be a partial sentence like this one. Partial sentence like this one. Between the two clauses, if you have to pick the main one, you would pick this one, right? So the main subject in the main clause is the champion. Everything else that comes before that can be distracting, and it can make the reader frustrated. So you put a comma, don't panic, the real thing follows. Same thing here. As far as I'm concerned, it is by far the best test of one's willpower. It is the real subject. So as far as I'm concerned is a little aside that sets the tone for what follows, right? Same thing here. She is the main subject. Although Sarah admits that she is a chocoholic, is a bit of a contrast that contrasts with the main sentence, right? So it doesn't really matter how long the introductory phrase or the clause is. As long as it's there, you need to use a comma to set it off from the main subject. So visually your reader is drawn immediately to the real subject. So all is well, right? Okay, I need to do the same thing here. Okay, the second principle is something related to fanboys. I'm thinking somebody really good looking like Brad Pitt, topless. He's fanning me and I'm lying on the beach having a good time, and fanboys, right? Fanboys. Doesn't that image come to you? Anyway, Fanboys is a mnemonic device for remembering coordinating conjunctions. So mnemonic, it will help you memorize, right? So for, it's here, for, and, nor, but, or, yet. So these are a particular kind of conjunctions. And they're called coordinating conjunctions because the clause A and the clause B and the fanboys in the middle, they're equally important. A, it's not like subordinating conjunctions where one meaning is more important than the other, as we have seen before, but this is equally important as this. Those are so these are coordinating conjunctions. So when you have one clause, almost a sentence, and another clause, almost a sentence, connected by fanboys, and the whole thing is one sentence, then you have to put a comma. So in this context, the way you understand this comma is understand it as if it's almost a period, because this is almost an independent sentence. It can't stand alone, but it doesn't want to, because it wants to be connected to what follows because the meanings are related. So to show respect for this almost sentence, you put not a period but a comma. Does that make sense? Almost a sentence and then a related sentence. So comma, fanboys. But notice that there's subject and a verb, subject and a verb, right? So that's a clause and this is a clause. Okay, fanboys. But this can be confusing because sometimes fanboys do not connect two clauses, but instead they connect phrases or words which are smaller units. So for example here, but connects loves, Hershey's Kisses, cannot stand M&Ms. These are not full, this one especially is not a full sentence, right? So if you're connecting partial sentences, no comma, because you wouldn't put almost a period. Because if you did, you would be missing the subject here. Does that make sense? Same thing here, Hershey's Kisses do not melt in the hands, leave a bitter aftertaste. These are two partial sentences, phrases, so no comma before the fanboys. What Sarah loves about Hershey's Kisses is the texture and flavor. The same thing, and only connects two nouns, so no comma before fanboys. The third principle is this thing called comma splice. You've probably heard it before, and it might have even given you nightmares, right? If you don't have fanboys between the two complete and separate thoughts, two clauses that is, using a comma alone creates a comma splice or a fused sentence. You know, when you have two train cars, you're supposed to have really strong couplings or whatever. But if you just put a comma, comma between two clauses, come on, I'm not doing anything fancy. One clause, another clause, and you put a comma, it would be sort of like trying to connect two train cars using a paper clip. Flimsy, and it's dangerous, it doesn't work, it's the comma splice, and you want to avoid it. So this would be a bad example. Chocolate can cure all ills. Independent clause. Sarah eats it all the time. They're kind of related, so you put a comma. No, don't do that because it's a paper clip. Remember, a comma is not a conjunction. It is an additional punctuation device, but it's not a proper conjunction. So you need a proper conjunction. So would make a good conjunction here, right? So how to fix comma splices? There are at least 3 ways. You can just add fanboys like this one that we did. Or change the comma to a semicolon, because semicolon is almost the same thing as a period. Somebody once said that if you want to show people that you have college education, use a semicolon. But otherwise, you don't really need a semicolon. Even if you don't use a single semicolon for the rest of your life, you'll be fine. But what it does is that it's not exactly as final as a period, so it shows a bit of a connection between the two clauses, two sentences. Chocolate can cure all ills. It's almost like it's not finished, so rising intonation. Sarah eats it all the time, so in your mind, there's a connection. So, hold on a second. The whole thing is not completed. But it does the same thing that a period does. Or you use the final punctuation, which is a period. So there are 3 ways of fixing comma splices. No reason for you to suffer from this disease. Okay, fanboy fakers. There are some short introductory phrases that function as transition words or set the tone of the following clause. They're very similar in meaning to coordinating conjunctions. Remember fanboys? But they're not fanboys. They look like fanboys. They're not conjunctions. They actually are called conjunctive adverbs. If you want to know the term, conjunctive adverbs. And these are examples accordingly, also, besides, consequently, all these things. So a bad example would be treating it as if it's fanboys, right? So Mike likes to sing, comma, however, comma, which is bad. Also bad is putting 1 comma, because they, however, needs to start a brand new sentence. It's not a conjunction that goes, it's not that coupling between the 2 trains. It starts a new sentence. So a good example would be Mike loves to sing, period, and start, however, comma, he has a terrible voice. Also good is if you want to show you have college education, put a semicolon. And notice that when you have a semicolon, you cannot capitalize what follows. And then after however, because the rule number 1, the introductory phrase rule applies, you put a comma here before the subject, remember? Also good is Mike loves to sing, period. And if you want to go a little fancy, put the however instead of in the beginning, you put it in the middle. He, however, has a terrible voice, but because it's distracting from the subject and the verb, you set it off with 2 commas. The next one is when you have a series of items, X, Y, and Z. You put commas between the items in a list. When giving a short and simple list, you don't really need this one. So this one, the last one right before the conjunction, is optional. But you are never wrong for putting it in there. And this is in fact a good idea, because when you have a longer, more complicated phrases you're connecting, you have to have the second comma. So, why not use it all the time? Then you'll never be wrong. Does that sound good? You're never wrong. Does that sound good? I'd like a rule like that. Okay, so a good example is I need to buy a shovel, a flower pot, and a water can from the garden shop. This list is short and sweet, and each one consists of a word or a phrase or something. So this is optional. But notice, in parentheses, you have it, that's not a problem. It's still good. How about when the phrases become longer, like understands his ingredients, a verb phrase, right? Do you agree? Starts with a verb. Buys from the best grocers and butchers, that's another verb phrase. Cooks with as much love as possible, that's another verb phrase. So when you have three verb phrases, so it doesn't have to be verb phrases always, it can be noun phrases, adjectival phrases. But when you have these items in a series, you need to have one comma here, another comma here right before the conjunction. So once again, when you're not sure, always use these commas, even the last one right before the conjunction. Notice that this sentence is just beautiful because it's parallel, and you'll probably see this word when you get your papers back. Parallelism refers to when you have a series of items, they all have the same form so that there is this nice symmetry. So understands his ingredients, buys from the best grocers and butchers, cooks with as much love as possible. You can see this beautiful symmetry of verb and a noun phrase, verb and a noun phrase, and a verb and a noun phrase, right? So this is symmetrical, therefore it's parallel. Parallel is beautiful. Okay, the next one is describers. Describers are modifiers, so adjectives are a type of modifiers, describers. Sometimes you want to stack them instead of using and. So look at this one. We're describing the word teenager, which is a noun, and we want to use at least 3 adjectives. So you can say a bashful teenager, you can say a timid teenager, a self-conscious teenager, but you want to stack them, and I don't want to bother with an conjunction. So I just put a comma here, a comma here. Same thing, you want to describe a girl, vivacious and charming. If you can use and, but if you don't want to go with and, then you want to be economical, you can put a comma. Go out with a loud and obnoxious, you can use and. If you were to use an and, you wouldn't use a comma. But if you want to go economical, instead of spending a lot of money for an and, you would put a comma. Excuse me. The last one, interrupters. Notice that your reader has the attention span of a fruit fly, but also this reader is a very cranky, impatient person. And when the reader sees the sentence, the reader just wants to see who did what or what happened, and all the other additional information is just fluff. I don't want that. So put commas to set off non-essential, parenthetical things that can go inside the parentheses, right? Information from the core of a sentence. The core of the sentence is who did what or what happened. So look at this sentence. Owen Wilson, a Texas native, was the only celebrity invited to Jerry's modest wedding. I just want to go from Owen Wilson was the only celebrity. And this thing, a Texas native, is additional information. I might have already known it because I'm such a big fan. Or, like, I don't really, it's okay, if you care to know, you can bother, but I don't want to bother with it. So, but I need some kind of visual guide, otherwise I want to read everything, and I have a tendency to take everything seriously at the same level of significance, but it's not as significant. So this comma here almost functions like parentheses, right? Like, don't be distracted by this, skip over it, read the core of the sentence. So it's a little etiquette kind of a thing, isn't it? Sarah thought that she could win some honors available to college athletes. Okay, if Sarah wants to get technical and add it, technically, I'm not talking about all, okay, then you can put commas to set it off. So it's almost like parenthetical. the back alley has been cleaned up after the murder. Okay, that's all I want to know. But if you want to get into the history of the back alley, you could go there, but leave me alone. Leave me out of this. And if you want to bother, okay, put comments. Interrupters. See, notice how cranky I sound? Okay, to summarize, we talked about the introductory phrases being set off from the main sentence, main subject and the main verb. Fanboys, when you have fanboys connecting two full clauses, you put a comma in fanboys. And we talked about how to avoid comma splices. And we talked about things like nevertheless that look like fanboys, but they behave differently. They're fakers. You need to spot them. And then a series of items, and then describers, stacked describers, or interrupters. I hope this will give you a better notion of how and why commas are used. Thank you for watching.